Hey everyone, Sparks back with another Goddess Victory Nikke video. Eve and Raven are back. This is from my favorite collab that Nikke has ever done, Stellar Blade. It is another game developed by Shift Up. If you haven't played it, check it out. It's on PS3, PS5, and PC. It's a lot of fun, but just be warned, it is challenging. But in this video, I want to talk about if they are good here in Nikke. So it was by far the best collab, but are the units still worth you getting? Because if we go here to the recruit, you can see that right now we can pull for Eve. She's on a rerun rate up banner, and we don't have Raven yet, but we will get her a week from now. So should you spend your hard-earned gems and tickets here right after anniversary on Eve, especially considering that we also have Neon still going and Mint, who has proven to be a very powerful burst too. So in this video, I'm going to go over what Eve's kit actually does, as well as what Raven's kit actually does, although the video will be a little bit more focused on Eve. And then I want to show you some damage comparisons and then talk about what squads you might make with these units, and then give a final recommendation on if it's worth you actually pulling for them. So this is going to be your complete, totally biased take on Eve, because she is my favorite character, and you can see I have made her my most powerful unit in the game, and she is the only limited character that I have actually gone for max core on. But let's take a look at her kit, okay? And then we'll take a look at Raven's. So Eve has a lot going on. By the way, a lot of even like skins going on. Like, she has some of the best skins in the game. Even her default is amazing, but we'll go ahead and leave her in this one. Let's take a look at her skills. So basically her whole kit revolves around crits. Now generally in Nikke, crit rate stuff, crit damage isn't really the best strategy. Oftentimes it's just a little weaker, and there have been some few exceptions, and one of those is going to be Eve. So what I want to draw your attention to is right at the very beginning of her skill 1. It says activates at the start of the battle, affects self, crit rate up 60% continuously. Okay, everyone has a default crit rate of about 20%, and she is just immediately 100% of the time going to have a 60% buff for an 80% crit rate. That means any extra crit rate you stack on her with things like your equipment is going to increase that even more, or whatever you get from other units as well. Now, I personally think going into more crit damage is a bit better, because you'll be critting so often at 80% or slightly above 80%, depending on who you're pairing her with. Just getting extra damage is kind of the way to go on her overload lines. The other thing that I want to draw your attention to is that she just keeps nuking things. So right here, activates at the start of the battle, affects self. Attack goes up 50% of caster's attack continuously, and max ammo up 25% continuously. And she will also have her own built-in bastion cube, okay? So every 10 normal attacks, if you're fighting an electric code enemy, which is what Iron is strong against, she will reload 3 rounds, okay? So she will have a super large clip if you pair her with some lines of max ammo, which I do have some max ammo on her right here. I would recommend probably at least 1 line of max ammo, and if you put a bastion cube on her, she can literally just shoot for basically the entire fight without ever reloading. That said, I still think Resilience Cube is best in slot, because more often than not, there's going to be things that happen, right? You'll need to take cover for a big attack, or the boss will jump off the screen, or something like that. So you're going to have times when you're reloading anyway, and just having an instant reload is still kind of better than just an infinite magazine, because there are times when you'll be, reloading whether you like it or not. But either one is going to be really strong on her. And now for her burst, just does a ton of damage. Deals 457% of final attack as damage. Attacks sequentially 6 times, okay? So she does a lot of damage, and we have some other things down here. I won't get into all of this, but the point is she does a lot of damage. And it's all based around the idea of just firing non-stop and dealing crits. Now let's take a look at Raven. Raven has a little bit more of a specialized kit, is also very strong, and she is a rocket launcher as opposed to Eve, who was an AR. If we take a look at her skills, She basically revolves around doing sustained damage and parts damage. Now, sustained damage is another form of damage that often isn't super great. You can put her on a sustained team, but generally you can just kind of let her do whatever she does and you'll get some extra sustained damage, but like focusing on that is not necessarily the way you want to go. However, parts damage is a big part of her kit. So while she can be quite effective against any type of boss or mobs with her AoE attacks, she's going to definitely shine more in enemies that have parts, particularly ones that regenerate frequently. Because if we look at her skill 2 here, it says, let's see, down towards the bottom, I think. So parts damage, and then activates when an ally or self destroys an enemy part. So anytime any part is destroyed, affects self, she gets sustained damage up. So she's just going to keep getting a damage buff whenever a part is destroyed. So the more frequently you're destroying parts, the better. And of course, you're just dealing a lot of damage to parts because she has a lot of her kit just focused on dealing more damage to parts. She also has great burst generation, and we'll get back to that a little bit later. But both Raven and Eve can be used very effectively no matter what you're fighting. So with that said, let's just talk about a few of some tests that I did, okay? Now, these, again, are not necessarily going to be super applicable to you because, as I said, I'm biased. Eve is my most powerful unit. But still, let's take a look at what the damage is. So I just ran a run in... I just did a run in the shooting range, and I just set a new personal best with this iron team that I used, and I used both Eve and Raven. And here is the comparison of the damage that they did. So you can see Eve is definitely doing more damage here, but of course, Raven is maximum break, Eve is core 7. Eve and Raven's damage, when built equally, is extremely similar, and it just depends on what exactly you're fighting. Sometimes Raven will do a little bit more, sometimes Eve will do a little bit more. So note that that is very, very comparable, okay? For me, of course, my Eve is dealing more damage. If we take a look at the next test, I compared her to Snow White. Now, this is, again, not super fair. Snow White is my other favorite unit, but Snow White is all in on her burst shots, right? And this is not a team that is really built around Snow White. So this is purely just relying on her raw capability on her own. She does burst fast enough because I have some charge speed on her, just barely to take advantage of leader's attack buff. But normally, if you are using Snow White, you want to kind of build completely around her with all units that are going to give her more of an attack buff. In this case, I just used the same generic teammate of Leader, Crown, and Modernia with whatever units I was comparing just to keep things kind of equal, right? And I wanted to use Modernia just to show you how damage on Eve compared to a very strong off burst that is just not having elemental damage, okay? Because we're always fighting electric code enemies in these examples. Another example here is Eve versus Bunny Milk. And yes, I was manualing Bunny Milk, making sure to hold her burst at the hold her charge at the appropriate times, and otherwise manualing with her. Now, again, my Bunny Milk, although is built, not as built as Eve. This looks horrible for Bunny Milk. Eve is doing like more than twice as much damage than her. That said, if I had a core 7 Bunny Milk, I would also expect their damage to be very, very similar. And you might be wondering, like, why are you even bothering to say this? You just keep saying they're all similar. This is kind of where Iron is at. If you look at the top tier of Iron attackers, there is very little difference between a lot of them. Now, there are some that just aren't really worth using that fall off significantly, but there are a ton that have very, very comparable damage, and then they might shine more if you're fighting a specific boss. The last test here was against Red Hood. Again, Eve crushing it. Red Hood, also very built. Red Hood doesn't even have much of an excuse here because I do have a very optimized Red Hood, and I think she's at core 4, so slightly weaker than Eve, but still. But this is an example where, the boss we're fighting is just not letting some of these other units like Snow White or Red Hood shine as much, and that's because they need multiple parts to pierce through to do a lot of damage. Now, that is kind of unfair, but this is sort of the point. Eve is good against everything. It doesn't matter what you're fighting. The boss can have a core or not a core, or parts or not parts, and Eve is still going to be a very, very strong iron type attacker. Now, moving on to a little bit more of a real world example, this is my team that I use for Ultra. Now, I have gotten a tier 9 clear on Ultra, and you can see that I used Rappy and Eve for it. And if we take a look at the next screen, you can see there is the tier 9 clear. Anise definitely helps with this. And Rappy is doing way more than Eve, okay? So Rappy is the undisputed best iron type attacker, also the best fire type attacker, and she's also getting juiced a lot by Anise because Anise is giving her that explosive damage buff, right? So Eve is not going to stand up to Rappy. Basically, nobody does in this type of scenario. Rappy is just one of the best units in any scenario in the game. So there we can see sort of the gap between like the true top units and where Eve is. That said, Eve still doing a lot of damage and is what got me to tier 9. If we take a look at another example against Ultra, you can see we got another tier 9 clear. And instead of using Eve, I used Red Hood along with Rappy. Now, if we go back really quick, Eve is doing 1.8 billion damage here, and Red Hood is doing 1.6 billion damage. Now, this is really important because Ultra has a lot of regenerating parts and things that will benefit a Pierce attacker, okay? Red Hood is kind of in her ideal scenario here, and Eve is still out damaging her on a similar build level. So you can see the power of Eve is quite high. All right, so that is all the damage comparisons that I want to show you. So now let's talk about some squad ideas. So we'll go in here to, you've already saw kind of what I thought was the best squad for fighting Ultra, and Eve was on that. But we'll go in and actually just make another squad from scratch. And let's just get rid of some of these. One of the ones that you might use would be Anise, along with Crown, and Rappy, and Eve, and Mast. Where's my girl Mast? This is going to be a really, really strong team that you would use potentially in a raid. Eve is likely going to go on your Crown team, aka whatever your highest damage Iron team is if you were doing a solo raid. Eve will probably go on whatever your Iron Union raid attack team is as well. So Eve is going to be in there, you know, getting the most damage out of her possible. Now you can do some subs here too, right? So if you don't have Anise, you can of course put in Siren, because Siren is still super good. You could also sub in Leader. She could still make it on there sometimes. That's going to work really well. And rather than Mast, let's just put Anise back in there for our best case scenario. Rather than Mast, you do have some other options, right? Like obviously I was using in the interception Helm, and Helm is going to be super good because she's going to synergize with, you know, Crown and just offer some healing and more buffs to your DPSs here as well, or even Privity, who is just another great off-burst buffer as well. So these are some like high tier teams you can do. Something like a little bit different is if you go with a Snow White Heavy Arms team. So again, you can use this for like some of the campaign pushing missions if you're doing hard mode campaign. So you could use Anise, Crown, Snow White Heavy Arms, Eve, and then you could also then throw in Helm as your healer slash buffer. And of course, if you just want more AoE damage to help in this team, you could put in Nayuta. I've done this in campaign. Or if you're having a hard time staying alive, you could of course not use Anise. Instead, you could use Moran, and that'll work as a good campaign team as well. And then, of course, we're assuming we're fighting something where we're trying to do like an iron weakness or something like that. And you don't necessarily always want to go on a full iron team for hard mode campaign. You need some of these other units that I've been talking about. A few quick notes here on Raven, because I do want to talk about her a little bit, even though it's more focused on Eve. Sometimes she can be used as an off burst. So that has definitely happened previously in Solar Rage, just because she has really good burst gen, and sometimes you just want that like damage to parts. Raven does have pretty good utility, whereas Eve, if you're using her, is pretty much going to be focused as like a main DPS, whereas Raven, sometimes she'll be that main DPS, sometimes maybe as like an off burst, a little bit more of a utility. Kind of depends, but they both are valuable. So now let's just talk about kind of an overview of what is even out there, right? So if I sort by iron only, here we go, and burst 3s, these are our options. Iron is one of the more difficult elements to fill out. And is not necessarily the most powerful element compared to some others, okay? So some notable things to think about. Obviously, Eve and Raven are collab units, so either you get them on this rerun or you just don't get them. Maybe they'll rerun again eventually, maybe a year from now, who knows? I feel like Shift Up might bring them back, but who knows what the game is like at that point anyway. So it's kind of like do or die right now. The other thing to keep in mind, another relevant iron attacker is Chisato, who was also a collab unit, and so if you didn't get her, she's never coming back, right? Other notable powerful units are Laplace and Julia, particularly Laplace. These are both very strong if you have their treasure. Treasures are a huge investment and take time. If you don't have their treasure, they are not worth using. They're going to have far worse damage than someone like Eve. If you have their treasure, they're going to be essentially the same, because as I've said, a lot of these iron attackers will just deal very similar damage. Bunny Soda is another relevant iron attacker for the shotgun team specifically. If you're not running the shotgun team, not super relevant. Maxwell is relevant, but she is going to be definitely a support, sometimes paired with Snow White or even Red Hood. Red Hood and Snow White are also pilgrims, so they're a little bit harder to get and build and get a lot of copies of as well. Bunny Milk is honestly probably the best iron attacker. If you put in the work to build her and actually manual her properly, which I'm not going to get into, is kind of out of the scope of this video, Bunny Milk is probably the one that is, really the best iron type attacker in a general scenario. Again, there are specialized situations where you're doing a shotgun team with Bunny Soda, or you're going against a specific boss with a team all built around Snow White that can be better. But Bunny Milk is going to be that one that kind of like can do anything, but she is difficult to use if you're someone who just likes to do auto. She's not going to be nearly as good. Selene is trash, Sugar is kind of trash, Small White is kind of trash, and keep in mind these are characters that I like. Like, I'm a big fan of Sugar, but the reality is they're just not relevant at this point. And with some of these units being very specialized or being more supports like Maxwell, you can see the pool of iron DPS is fairly small. And so that's why I would say I would recommend getting Eve and Raven. They're both very good, and there just isn't a ton of options for you in iron. And I mean, another good reason to get Eve, if you're a fan of physics. I don't need to say any more, okay? We don't want to get demonetized here. So that's that. Let's wrap this up. Like I said, Milk is kind of the one that is potentially like the best, but is again going to require a lot of effort. And then you have specialized situations like Snow White or Bunny Soda. But really the best universal iron DPS for general teams, whatever boss or game mode you're doing, it's going to be Eve. And I would recommend getting a copy of her. And once she's gone, she's gone. Again, Raven is also very useful. You might want to consider getting a copy of Raven as well when she comes out. Let me know if you have any further questions. Hype the video if you're watching on mobile. Subscribe if you haven't already if you found this video helpful. Like the video if you want to see more, and I'll catch you guys in the next video or stream.